There's a secret language that not only indicates but can actually create a romantic connection between two people. You don't have to be perfect at it, but if you use it, you can actually create a spark between two people where there wasn't one before. You can reignite passion or desire between you and a man, even if it has kind of fallen flat or things have kind of dulled out or he's lost attraction for you. And you can actually enjoy the dating process and your relationships a whole lot more. So today we're going to be talking about the secrets of flirting. If you're ready to learn about the secrets of flirting, type yes into the chat and let's get started. So let's talk about how to make your boring conversations so much more interesting through the use of flirting. So number one, first thing that we're going to be talking about is laughing at his jokes. So there's been a bunch of studies that have been done on this, and what they found is that both men and women really are more attracted to someone who has a good sense of humor, just generally speaking. And for women, they tend to want a guy who is funny, right? Who makes lots of jokes, who's funny, that kind of a thing. And for guys, they tend to want to find somebody who thinks that they're funny, right? So a woman who laughs at his jokes. So just laughing at a guy's jokes can show a guy that you're on the same page. It can show him that you subtly are interested in him or like him. And so it's a really, really powerful thing to just laugh at a guy's jokes. If you're here with us right now, go ahead and say hi in the chat and tell us where in the world you're watching this from. It's cool to see women from all over the world watching these live streams. Okay, so number two is having a playful mindset. So remember that being playful, getting into kind of this playful state and having fun and, like think of it like, like you're tickling each other, you're like teasing him, you're having fun with him, you're flirting, you're doing exaggerated movements, or you're just having fun, right? Get into this mindset, this feeling of just having fun and having a good time. And that actually can create this spark of emotion in him where he's having more fun. He's excited. You have to remember, most people live incredibly boring lives. Most people, they are bored out of their minds all the time, and they're looking for something that's more interesting. And if you are interesting at all, right, it creates interest, it creates a spark, it creates something there where someone will go, what's going on there? This person's fun, this person's interesting, this person's different than everybody else that I meet out there. And that can be a really powerful thing when it comes to connecting with and attracting a guy. And the way that you do this is, one way is just getting into kind of this playful mindset, like thinking about it and saying, what is it like? Would it feel like to just be playful, to have fun, to have a good time? And, get into that and start doing that. The next one is just like, don't be serious. Like, what if you weren't taking everything so seriously? Like, when most people go on dates, they're like, all right, I have to figure out what this person's deal is right now, right? And so it's kind of this weird, serious thing going on, and it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It sucks, right? And instead, what you want to do is stop taking everything so seriously. I mean, if it's a serious moment, if it's a time to be serious, have some common sense, have some emotional empathy, have some, make sure that you're doing the right thing at the right time. But in general, if you're having fun, if you're trying to be playful, if you want to create attraction, just have a good time, right? Stop taking everything so seriously and just have fun. And you'll end up having a lot more fun. He'll end up having a lot more fun, and it'll be a much better experience for both of you, right? So just remember, if you're flirting, you're being playful, you're having fun, you're not taking things too seriously. You want to remember that, most of the flirting stuff that you say out there, like I'll give some flirting scripts or something to somebody and they'll be like, they'll say it, they'll be like, you're trouble, or whatever it is that I tell them. And it's like, no, 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 just have fun. Like, oh, you're such trouble, right? Think about it. Like when you're being playful, it comes across so much better. Like, oh, you're such trouble. Like, oh, you're bad. I can tell right now, like, oh, something like that, right? Suddenly it's fun, it's playful, it's interesting, and it's better flirting than, your trouble. You know what I mean? Like, okay. So anyway, I think you get my point. Next one is letting your quirky side out. So we all have kind of quirks and things that we do that, I know you do, you might be denying it right now, but I know that you have a quirky side to you. You have some things that are a little bit weird or funny or whatever. This is a great time to bring some of those out on dates in a relationship, bringing those out, talking about those things. It can be fun, right? It can be funny and it can be really endearing. It can make him feel like there's something different and interesting about you, and it can leave a really great impression on him. And so you want to bring something out. It brings out your real personality, which is really interesting and attractive. And so let's say maybe you're, obsessed with naming house plants, right? Just talk about it a little bit, admit it, right? Have a moment of like admitting this quirk that you have. Like, oh, you can ask a question like, hey, do you have any like, quirks or weird things about you, and he might be like, oh, I don't know, or whatever. And you're like, okay, I've got something that I have to admit. I name all of my houseplants. I know I have Fred and George and, Trisha and all these other, whatever. Or maybe you're like a potato chip connoisseur. You know everything about potato chips or wine or, whatever it is. Maybe there's something that you're a connoisseur about, something that you really know a lot of stuff about it. And it's kind of weird that you know so much about it, but you just happen to know a lot about this one thing. Or maybe you're like really weirdly kind of into something. Let's say maybe you're into, some kind of movie or, some kind of show or something like that. You just really obsessed with like anime or, Desperate Housewives or whatever, right? So maybe a genre of a show or movie or something like that. Or anything, could be anything, could be something from work or something from another part of your life. It doesn't matter. Just find some things that are unique or interesting about you and say, hey, this is something that I can admit and talk about. And then you can share it with him and then, ask him and, talk about it and be like, yeah, I'm a little embarrassed about this, but right. And it's cute. It's endearing. It's kind of like pulling out this vulnerability about you, which is really, really attractive. And so it's a fun kind of basic level kind of flirting technique that you can do. So put it in the chat. What are some unique traits or quirky things that you have that you could mention to a guy? Let me know in the chat. I want to know about your quirkiness. Let us know in the chat. Okay, so number four is body language, right? So body language, you can say a lot more with your body than you can ever say with your words. And it can be a really powerful way to flirt without even saying anything necessarily. And as a woman, it can be a really powerful thing because you don't need, like, guys tend to need more of a overt way of flirting, whereas women, it doesn't have to be as overt. It can be a lot more subtle. And with body language, you can do a lot of those kind of subtle things, right? So for instance, like a lingering glance is a really attractive one. So you're just like kind of looking at him just a little, this isn't like some kind of creepy staring contest where you're like, it's like a lingering glance where you're just looking at him a little bit longer than you normally would look at somebody, right? And then maybe like a second or two, and then like glance away and just smile and like look back at them, right? Like it's a fun kind of flirty thing that you do just with your facial expressions, right? There's a lot of facial expressions where you can like, do like flirting kind of things, like let's do the eyebrow thing. You're like, or like, I'm doing all these I'm gonna see women all over the world doing eyebrow things now. Anyway, um, another one that you can do is really, really, really powerful one is there's this like idea about leaning forward and leaning back, right? And when you're leaning forward, it's showing interest, right? You're showing that you're interested in something that somebody's doing. And it can be a really powerful thing to just like listen and lean kind of forward when a guy's like talking to you and you're like listening to him. And then, once you've done that for a little bit, let's say a minute or two, you can actually pull back and start like like listening from like pulling back a little bit. And what that'll do is actually create this vacuum where it feels like, he was like, oh, she's interested in me. He might not even be thinking of it consciously, but subconsciously he's like, oh, she was interested in me. And then all of a sudden you're kind of leaning back and he's like, oh, why is she like leaning back? And he might actually start leaning forward when you lean back. It's a really, really powerful thing for him to be doing because his leaning forward then shows that he's interested and he's trying to get closer to you. And that can be a really, really powerful thing. Another one is just like biting your lip. So, like I was saying, there's a bunch of facial stuff that you can do. There's facial stuff that you can do, and one of them is just like biting your lip. Like yeah, like you don't have to do it. You don't have to do it that much, but just like biting your lip a little bit and smiling. Like it can be a fun one. It can be a fun one. And so there's a whole bunch of different things that you can do with your face. That's just flirting. It's subtle, like flirting, teasing things that you're doing. If you get what I'm talking about right now, type in "I get it" into the chat. If you don't get what I'm talking about, go ahead and ask whatever questions you have, and I'm going to get to your questions here in just a little bit. So number 5 is subtle touch. So subtle touch can be really, really powerful. So little touches where you're just like touching him on his arm or on his shoulders or, on his back or, on his hand, anything like that. Little touches can be a really powerful thing. It can show a little bit of interest. It can create kind of like a subtle arousal thing going on, and it can give him permission to touch you back in similar or the same types of ways, right? So touching can be a really, really powerful one. And so there's a bunch of different things that you can do that are kind of like go-tos maybe that you have. Like one of them might be like, like adjusting his shirt just a little bit, just coming over and being like, hey, like, oh, just fixing this for you, right? And so you just like, you just do a couple little things where you're like, oh, just fixing this for you, right? And it's kind of this playful thing because you're like touching him and you're doing it and you're reaching through that touch barrier, and there can be some kind of like verbal banter and stuff that happens from there if you want to or not, whatever is fine. But you're just creating this touch, right? Another one is just like touching his hand, and sometimes you can like touch his hand, just like look him in the eyes real quick, and then like pull your hand away, right? And it's kind of like this moment. It's like this little moment inside of everything where it's like this like subtle like flirting, like I just touched you, and it's like, and then I'm pulling it away, right? And it's like whoa, whoa, whoa. And that can be a really, really powerful thing. Okay, so number six is casually pointing out his interest. And so this is something that I call PMI flirting. And in my opinion, it's one of the best types of flirting that you can possibly do. Showing interest, it's okay, right? But pointing out his interest is much, much better than you simply showing interest. Sometimes I'll talk or listen or read. I listen and read all kinds of stuff around dating and relationships and stuff all the time, just because I'm interested in staying up to date and seeing what people are talking about. And a lot of times people will talk about flirting like it's this act of showing lots of interest. And they'll like be like, the more interest you show, the better, right? And it's like, yeah, that's not really true, right? And then there's this other idea of like leaning back where you're showing like less interest or no interest at all, and that's not great either. What's really great is his interest in you. That's better than anything else that's going on there, right? And it also reduces your risk, because when you start showing interest, you're putting yourself out on the line, and you're saying, hey, I'm interested in you. Do you like me too? Right? And if you it's much better when you're pointing out his interest, because then it's not risky for you at all, right? Because you're like, oh, you're into me, right? Like, oh, I see you're so into me, right? And then if he's kind of weird about it, it's like, don't worry, I like that. I like that you're interested in me, right? And so this is a better way. It's a little bit more of an advanced way, but I thought maybe since we are going over this, you could definitely handle it. So uh, it's um, just looking at what he's doing. So finding anything that he does and pointing out that he's showing some kind of interest in you. Let's give an example. So one example would be like if he does gentlemanly things for you, right? So like opening a door for you and letting you go through, or pulling out your chair, or like walking on the inside of the street, any of those things where he's being a gentleman, point it out. Just talk about it. Say, oh, you pointed, you pulled out my chair for me. You're such a gentleman, right? And it's a flirting technique of you pointing out that he's treating you well. He's doing something. He's showing interest of some kind, right? Oh, you opened the door for me. That's so sweet, right? Or if he like scoots his chair up towards you, you're like, oh, you're trying to get closer to me. Like, that's cute. Or if he's like remembers something that you said and he's like, oh yeah, you mentioned blah blah blah, and you're like, oh, you're like remembering things about me, like really paying attention. That's awesome, right? And all you're doing there is you're recognizing that he is showing interest in you. You're pointing it out, right? And it takes that dynamic. Flirting, what it does is it takes that dynamic from being like a friendship thing or a boring thing or a, like stressful thing. I'm finding this stuff out about you. And it's turning it into like, hey, I'm a woman, you're a man, and we're interested in each other. And it's fun and it's flirty and it's playful and it's, all these great things. And that's really what you want to do. And it can be a really, really powerful thing. So what flirting techniques are you going to take and use out there, or what techniques have you used in the past that maybe have worked for you or that you really like using? Put them into the chat. Let me know. I'd love to hear about them. And so I'm going to go over the different things that we're talking about. Again, flirting, to remind you what it is it's either indicating or creating some type of romantic connection between two people, right? It's going from like friendship or acquaintance, and it's turning it into a romantic connection. That's what flirting is. And so the first one is laughing at his jokes, really powerful. Second one is having a playful mindset, always coming from this playful mindset of you're having fun, you're not taking things too seriously, you're having a good time. Number three is letting your quirky side out. So finding things that that you have that's unusual or different, and just mentioning them and doing it in kind of a vulnerable way and just having fun with it. Number four is using your body language, specifically your facial expressions and what it is that's going on in your face can be really, really powerful. Number five is subtle touch. So touching him just in small ways can be a really, really powerful one. And then six is casually pointing out his interest. Does that make sense? All right, let's talk about what you guys have questions with. Lots of people saying hi. Lots of people on X here today. Carolyn likes my advice. Well, I appreciate it. I'm glad you're here, Carolyn. Thank you. Wanda says, I'm at a point now, I'm so traumatized by men I see flirting or anyone being nice to me as a reason to be suspicious. Yeah, I mean, it's fair enough. That's fair enough, right? But if you want to build a connection, one of the best ways to do it, they've done a bunch of science on this, and they found that flirting is like one of the most powerful ways to build a connection between two people, especially a romantic connection that you want to have in a romantic sense, right? Bored Angel says, I don't think I can ever go dating or flirt in person. You can. You can, Bored Angel. I believe in you. There you have the power to do this. You can do it, Bored Angel. I know you can. All right. Wanda says, I think one of the best relationship advice I ever got was from an older person. They said, if you are going to fall in love with anything about a person, fall in love with their eyes because it's the only thing that will never change. Aw. And she says, and Matthew, you have gorgeous eyes. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Board Angel says, I can't do any of those. Which ones can't you do? We'll talk about how you can do some of those. Valeria says, how would it be adjusted with age? So, with age, it's not as much about age, right? Because if you go and like I've studied like what's going on with people that have been together for, 50, 60 years, and many of those older couples that have been together for a very, very long time, they still do all this stuff, right? They still are playful. They still, poke and, pinch each other, and, they tickle each other and they tease each other, and they do all that kind of stuff, especially if it's a couple that's been together and they're still like in love with each other. And it's important to continue to be playful and to have fun and keep that romantic connection, even if you've been together for a really long time, even if you're an older couple. It's normal. So the difference isn't about age. The difference is about you and what works for you and what you like to do, right? So what you need to find is, what are you comfortable with? What do you want to do that can be a really like a good thing for you to try out or do, because it works with your personality, it works with how you are, right? Like, and finding that unique kind of way that you like to flirt and do it, right? Because everybody's different, and sometimes people are like, oh, that's flirting, and if that's flirting, then I'm not going to do it, right? And we're not talking about anybody flirting, we're talking about you flirting. And so you need to find out what works uniquely for you. That's a great question there, Valeria. So Light Seeker says, question, how do you establish boundaries without offending him about not blowing up my phone and expecting an immediate response to text and emails and phone calls? So that's a great question. Great question, Light Seeker. The best way to do this is to what they call the sandwich technique, right? So the sandwich technique, it starts at the top with saying something that you like or something that you want, right? Like, hey, I really love talking to you. I really love communicating. I've had a great time, talking, I can't wait to meet up, something like that. One of them, you don't want to say all of them, just one of them. Like, hey, I really enjoy, talking to you. And then, you know, put in the boundary after that. You can either say but or and, where you're like but, or you can say and, it's I'm having a hard time with how quickly you need me to respond, and then explain it because I'm really busy. I've got a lot of things going on, whatever it is that the because is, and then say, um, can you like be more patient with me, in terms of responding to you because I can't be that fast, right? And see what he says. Sometimes when people are really impatient that way, it can be a problem just because they are impatient, or they are expecting everything to happen right then and there, right? And so setting a boundary is a really powerful thing, because then you get to see, how does he respond to my boundaries, right? How does he, respond to me? Is he respecting them? Is he pushing, does he push them away? Does he, reframe it? Does he try to convince you that, you're in the wrong? Like, what does he do from one of your boundaries? And so that's what you get to find out by, setting that boundary with him. Does that make sense, Light Seeker? That's the best way to kind of set a boundary, is using the sandwich technique. All right. So Bella says calling him terms of endearment. I'm guessing that's what you're going to be talking about. Patricia says, is it okay to use terms such as sweetie, babe, etc. after a few dates? The chemistry is great. Yeah, you might want to kind of, because everybody's different around this, right? Some people are seriously turned off by it, like they just hate it. There's some people that feel like it's offensive for whatever reason. That tends to be more women that are offended by it. But um, uh, some people just don't like it. Some people do, right? And so what you want to do is test it out, try it. Like, can you say it? Yeah, absolutely, you can say it. And it's not a big deal to say it at all. Like, sweetie, I'd start with like sweetie first, or something like that. And you can even ask them about it, like call them sweetie, and then be like, oh, like, are you okay with me calling you sweetie? Or like, what do you think of that? People that use those little, terms of endearment or pet names or whatever it is, right? And you can see what it is that he ends up saying around that. Betty says, Mr. Coast, are you married? Haha, no, I'm engaged, actually. I am engaged. We'll be married soon, though. Belle says that's the way of flirting by complimenting things about him. It's one way of flirting. In my opinion, it's one of the worst, or the one of the least kind of effective in terms of getting what it is that you want. Showing interest can be a very useful thing, right? The problem with like compliments and showing interest is that people tend to take them and they take it way too far, right? Like if you show a little bit of interest and it's reciprocated, if you show a little bit of interest and it's, accepted, that's cool. But some people take it and they're like, oh, okay, so flirting, what I got to do is I got to do this like huge display, grand display of showing interest in another human being, right? And then they're like, oh, you're so amazing and awesome and just great in every single way. And it's like, just, it feels kind of icky, right? And so you don't want to go overboard on giving compliments or showing interest or any of those kinds of things. It's better for you to have fun and be playful and tease and that kind of a thing and show a little bit of interest here and there throughout the process. But that tends to be more of an advanced level thing that people do who are, used to doing that kind of a conversational thing. And if you're not used to doing that, then I would be very sparing on the compliments and going overboard like that, because it can come across as like you're way too interested. And generally speaking, especially around attraction, men and women, they want to feel like they're on the same page as the other person, right? So if a guy comes up to you and he's like, oh my God, you're just the most amazing woman in the world. And, let's get married and fly around the world together, and you don't really know this guy, you're going to be like, why is he so interested in me when I barely even know him yet? Right? That's what you're thinking. However, if you are thinking, like, I'd love to get married and travel the world with this guy, and he's like the perfect man for me, and he's like, wow, like we should get married and, do all these things, you're going to be like, yeah, because you're on the same page, right? And so you don't want to go overboard until you find out if you're on the same page. And that's what most people are looking for. If one person's way higher than the other, the person that's not as attracted or interested or whatever feels like there's something weird going on or there's something wrong there or whatever. And so you don't want to go overboard on that. Does that make sense? Belle says, if you kiss on the lips on your first date, is it going to be doomed already? Not necessarily. Actually, it's not that big of a deal to kiss on a first date, right? And it's really up to you in terms of, how you're feeling and where you're at with that. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing, right? It's I wouldn't go much further than that, though. Like, you want to take time to get to know each other. One of the biggest problems that I see in like in people in dating and relationships right now is that a lot of people are jumping into relationships way too soon, right? They're hooking up way too soon. They're getting into relationships way too soon. You want to wait and give it some time and actually get to know each other a little bit better before you're doing those kinds of things. That way because what happens is the further you go, right? And the way that you want to look at it is, um, if I do this with this person, is it going to make me feel so attached that if things don't go well, I'm going to be devastated by it? And if kissing makes it so that you feel really attached to somebody, because for some people, kissing does that, then you might want to back off of kissing until you've gotten to know them a bit better. Because in the first date, first two dates, whatever, you don't really know each other that well, and it takes time to actually get to know each other. And so you want to make sure that this is a good person before you get attached to that person. And so there's a bunch of different ways to prevent yourself from getting overly attached. And if you're here with us right now and you're interested in getting coaching or talking to my team about coaching for free, you can jump on a free call with them. Go to matthewcoast.com and you can jump on a call with my team. They'll help you figure out what the challenge is that you are having in your dating life right now. They'll talk to you about what you need to do moving forward. And if it makes sense to do coaching together, they'll also offer that. And if not, no big deal. Okay. So Board Angel says, I do not believe myself if a guy is over complimenting. It's like, are you kidding me? Yeah, sometimes it's too much. And you're like, is this like, why is this person, doing this right now? Are they really as interested as they're acting? Yeah. Almanette on Instagram says, over interest is generally a red flag. Yeah, it's weird, right? And it can be a problem even if it's a genuine interest, right? Because sometimes both men and women, guys are known for doing this, where they get into this biological drive where they're just like, oh, I'm so interested in you. You're so interesting to me. Oh, you're awesome, right? And at some point, what happens, right? Because what I call this is like having your love drunk goggles on, right? And you're like doing this, and at some point, it like they sober up from being love drunk and reality starts kicking in, their insecurities start kicking in, their problems start kicking in, the patterns that they've been in their whole lives start kicking in, and they start pulling away or disappearing or acting weird and funny because the what they created at the beginning of the dating process isn't something that they can actually fulfill on or keep doing long term. Does that make sense? Laurel says, how can we create more desire? I'm too playful, uh, but I feel like men see me more like a friend. Right. So if I were you, I would start focusing on the PMI stuff that I was talking about before, where you're like pointing out where he is like showing interest in you, because then you'll get a better indication, right? When you're pointing out his interest, it can do a lot of great things. It can find out how interested he is in you, right? You might not know how interested he is in you. And, you look at it and you're like, well, maybe we have a friendship vibe. Well, if you start pointing it out and you're like, oh, like, stop looking at me like that. This is one of my favorite ones where you're like, he's like looking at you and you're like, oh, stop looking at me like that. And he's like, what do you mean? You're like, oh, you keep looking at me like, you want to kiss me, or you keep looking at me like you're attracted to me. Right. And he's like, and he might deny it or whatever. And you can be like, "Ah, don't worry about it. I kind of like it. Right. And what you're doing there is you're pointing out that he's interested in you. And the worst case scenario when that happens is he's just like, no, I'm not really that in. We're just friends. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Right. Best case scenario is he's like, yeah, like, oh, you've been doing it to me, and you're like, well, maybe I have, right? And it turns into like this flirty vibe where you find out that yeah, he is interested, right? Because if he doesn't deny it, then he's probably interested, and he's like just he doesn't want to say it aloud, right? But he's interested, and so now you've pointed that out, and now it's this conversation that you're having. Does that make sense, Laurel? So Marion Southwest says, I've been in a relationship for 5 months yesterday. We went for a drive together. He wasn't really happy or nice, made me feel terrible. I left when I got back to his place, then get a text, it's over. That sucks. Sorry to hear about that. And I hope I'm not sure what you want to do there. But if you want any help or you want any advice or you want to help get through it, just let us know and we can talk about it. So, Kitty Cat says, you have wonderful advice, Matthew. I think this will help me immensely as I start to put myself out there again. Well, I'm glad to hear it there, Kitty Cat. Daniela Manja says, I have trouble waiting for him to show he is interested. Yeah, and so like what I was talking about before, like the PMI stuff is the best stuff for all of this because you're like waiting for him to show. Like a lot of times what happens is that the man and the woman, they get into this situation where it's almost like they're in a game of chicken, right? And the man's like waiting there and he's like, like, is she going to show that she's interested in me? And the woman's sitting there and she's like, is he going to show that, he's interested in me? And so you're both sitting there waiting for the other person to show that they're interested in the other person. You guys don't even know, right? I had a woman come to me a while back and she was in this situation where this guy was like driving. He was driving from like an hour and a half away to go on dates with her, right? And she was like, is he actually interested in me? Does he like me? Like, I don't know. Like, he hasn't made any moves on me. Like, why does he keep showing up for these dates? And I'm like, because he likes you and he doesn't know how to make that next move. And he's not sure if you're okay with him making the next move. So he just keeps showing up, right? That's what he's doing, right? And I was like, this is what you want to do next. And so I gave her the subtle touch thing, right? I was like, just, next time you're hanging out at a bar or wherever, restaurant, just put your hand onto his hand for a second, look him in the eye, and, smile and pull your hand away, right? I'm like, after that, it'll be, he will start making moves on you, right? And sure enough, she came back to me, a couple of days later and she was like, yeah, you're right, Matt. This is what happened. He started like, like getting closer to me and trying to touch me and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like he likes you. And these two people are, that's what happens is you get into these situations where you're both sitting there and you're like, what do I do? Right. And all you have to do is do something that creates permission for the other person to start doing things. And then suddenly, you're in a situation where he's hitting on you, right? So, yeah, I hope that makes sense. Lots of people saying they get it. Cool. All right, let's see. What other questions do we have? So, boop, boop, boop. Parissa says, what if you break up because you thought the guy says he hates calling on the phone? Halftime leaves in a different city for work and grown kids, but you like talking on the phone versus texting, but he texts constantly, then you regret the breakup after a few dates was immature, but the guy is very hurt and calls it a life lesson. Plus, I wasn't sure he cared too much, but is over. What do you think about a situation like this? I think he had ADHD too, only dated for a month. So here's what you want to think about, Parissa, is you want to think like, is the way that this person is, can they take me to the relationship that I ultimately want to have? Right. And the relationship that you ultimately want to have, most women think of it in terms of like things that are happening in the relationship. And I want you to throw that away. And instead, I want you to start focusing on emotions, right? What emotions do you want to experience in a relationship? And what this guy does is, can he create those emotions with you so that you can have the relationship that you ultimately want to have? Does that make sense? So, my guess is that you probably have a few different emotions. Most women have four that they're looking for. First one is feeling like they're a priority, like they're special, like they're important. Second one is security, feeling like this person isn't going anywhere, like they are consistent, like that kind of a thing. Number three is feeling like they're on your side, like you have that strong connection, like they're there with you, like they see you, like they hear you, they understand you. And then number four is the passion piece, where you want to have chemistry and that, rip the clothes off and, make sweet love to each other kind of a thing, right? And so the question is, can this man create the kind of relationship that you're looking to be in, the emotions that you want to feel? Are you experiencing those with him? And if that's not possible, then you want to let go of him. And if it is possible, but there's some little things here and there that either could be tweaked or you need to compromise on or whatever, you might want to give it another shot or give it in consideration. Does that make sense, Carissa? That's what you want to be focusing on. Okay. And Image Mad says, not sure my comments are seen here. I'm seeing your comment right now. Desi says, what do you do when a guy keeps contacting you and asking you to hang out? We have been having dinner for 2 months and he never paid for dinner or offered to pay. I am disappointed. So you've been having dinner for 2 months and he's never paid for dinner. Well, that's a conversation to have, right? So what you're talking about right now is like a values thing, right? So we all have different things that we look at in terms of like our value structure in life, right? And for some people, it's like, they want to be like, for some men, they want to be the provider, they want to be the protector, they want to take care of things, right? That kind of a thing. And for some guys, they want to do like 50-50 splits, and they want to have a 50-50 kind of partnership relationship. And so what you need to do is, one, figure out what it is that you want. What it sounds like is that you want to have a situation where the guy's taking care of things and paying for things at least some of the time, right? And then you want to have a conversation with him about what he thinks about it, right? This is a conversational thing that you should have with a guy when you're first seeing him and dating him. Just find out where he is on that spectrum and why he thinks that way, and then look at it and say, what is it that I want? And can I have the relationship that I ultimately want to have if this guy is the way that he is? For some guys, I was talking about these kind of two behaviors, or this polarity of things. Well, there's a lot of guys that are in the middle where they don't really care one way or the other, and they just kind of do whatever they think they're supposed to do, right? A lot of people have strong viewpoints on this. A lot of men do, a lot of women do, some people don't, right? And so what you want to do is find out where he's at, find out where you're at, and then mix and match them together and say, can this work out with things the way that they are? For most women that I've met, they tend not to be able to do or want to do the 50-50 thing long term. It sounds nice. They say it. It kind of like it makes them feel good because they're like equality, egalitarian, and then they get into those situations and it's okay for a while. But at some point they want the guy to be more of the masculine, guy figure in the relationship. That's just what I've seen, even with, super liberal women that have been like 50-50, and at some point they're like, I'd really like him to like, start taking over stuff or whatever, right? And so you want to figure out where that's at. and what makes sense for you to do around that. Does that make sense? So Desi says, how do we contact you? Well, the best thing for you to do is go to matthewcoast.com. If you need some help, some personal help, go to matthewcoast.com and you can jump on a free call with my team and you can talk to them about what your situation is, what's going on with you, talk about what they need to do moving forward, you need to do moving forward. They'll help you figure out what that is. And then if you're interested in doing coaching with my team, we can talk about that as well. You just got to go to matthewcoast.com. So, let's see. MZ Tinny says, why some guys are boring when it comes to texting, but the day we met, he's all very touchy in person. Some people just aren't text message people, right? And generally speaking, the general rule that, in my opinion, the best general rule to think about in terms of texting, especially in early dating, is that you want to use texting mostly for meeting up and using it for logistics and stuff like that. There are exceptions to that rule, especially if you're both into texting, but especially if a guy isn't into texting, don't try to force him to be a texting person, right? That is a losing situation for the most part. Sometimes he might be able to do it for a little bit, but then it ends up dying off because he's just not a texting person. It's better to focus I have a phrase that I talk about in my Forever Woman program where it is the magic is in the meetup, right? The magic is in the meetup. So you want to focus on the meetup and getting to the meetup because that's where all the magic happens. There's a lot of confusion that happens over text. There's a lot of misunderstandings. There's a lot of, people getting offended needlessly because they misunderstood something. It's better to focus on meeting up with somebody and connecting with them than it is to try to make this person turn into a texting person when he's so boring and that's just not who he is, right? That's just not the way to do it. Oh, and then she says, I mean, he was love bombing at first, but then we first met, he was touchy, then texting got dry. I know he's still trying to connect because he still would text. Maybe he's gotten shy. Yeah, my suggestion is to focus on the meetup. Just focus on the meetup, right? So one of the things you want to look at with these guys is, what's going on with them over time, right? Because a lot of people get caught up in the short-term things, right? We went on one date. We went on 2 dates and the sparks were flying and things were going all over the place. It's like, well, what happens in 3 months? Are there still sparks? Are you still attracted? Is he, going into some weird pattern? That's usually how, it takes time to really see what's going on with people. And so give it time, and just allow it to either bloom or fall apart. So, Image Mad says, may I say? Well, I mean, post whatever you got, and we can talk about what's going on with you and your situation. Just post it. So, doopy-doopy-doopy-doo. All right. Let's see here. Doopy-doopy-doo. Yeah, okay. So, all right. Well, let's see. Very controlling and pushy. How to deal with a guy who's very controlling and pushy? Well, it depends on the situation that you're in, right? So are you married to this guy? Are you in a relationship with this guy? Is this early dating? Ultimately, there's one of the biggest mistakes that I see women get into where they end up being with guys that aren't good for them is that they do this thing where they're like, like I meet a guy and I'm attracted to him, so I'm gonna latch on to him, right? And it's like they latch onto his foot, and it's like, you see those kids, like holding onto their parents' foot, and the parents like dragging them. They're like dragging against the ground, just holding onto this parent's foot. You don't want to be like those kids, right? you want to be very intentional about what it is, what kind of a relationship you're getting into, and what kind of relationship you want, and whether this person can take you there or not, right? Pushy isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be. Some women like that. They prefer a guy that's more pushy, that's more controlling, that kind of a thing. And that's okay, right? But you need to have certain boundaries and you need to say, okay, what are my boundaries? And you need to be very strong in those boundaries if you're going to be with somebody that's very controlling and very pushy, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time um, dating and being in a relationship with them, because you're going to feel like uh, they're too much for you, and over time you're going to be like, oh well, I knew he was pushy from the beginning, and then at some point you're going to be like, oh, I'm in this relationship with this guy that's just walking all over me and he's taking me for granted, Matt, like, why, and I'm going to be like, well, you knew this from the beginning that he was like this, and either it's something that you can deal with and it can work for you and get you into the relationship you want, or it's not something that you can deal with and you can work with and can get you into the relationship you want. So the question is, which one is it? And only you can tell us that. And so, like I said, the best thing for you to do is to have strong boundaries and to maintain those boundaries and to figure out how to communicate in a way that communicates these boundaries, like what we were talking about before with the sandwich method. Also, there's three kind of really high value ways to deal with somebody that's overly pushy or who's breaking your boundaries. And the way is to communicate what it is that you want, right? To walk away when they aren't respecting you, they aren't respecting your boundaries, they're kind of pushing through it. And then the third piece is to make it so that they have to earn a place back into your life. So they don't just get to like come back into your life. They have to earn it, right? They have to work their way. They have to prove that they're going to respect you and treat you well and all those kinds of things in order to get back into your life. And those are the three high value ways to deal with a situation where somebody's being disrespectful or, pushy or overly controlling or any of that kind of stuff. And if you do that, you will end up in a better situation, right? The problem that a lot of women have is that they just, they're like, oh, well, he's just pushy and controlling, and they just let him walk all over you. If you can't maintain that, you shouldn't be with somebody who's like that. Does that make sense? Okay, so Image Mad says, okay, so I would like to say it feels as if so many here are afraid to stand up for themselves and that they will bow down to all they think he wants without honoring our own needs. Why are so many afraid to stand for who they are and what they need? That's a great question. What I've found after working with women for over 12 years and just working with tons and tons of women that are in situations where they're afraid or they're having problems standing for who they are, it really ultimately boils down to their mindset and their psychology. And it boils down to the fact that they don't really own their value. They don't believe that their voice is valuable, that that their voice deserves to be heard, that they are a woman of value that deserves to have somebody in their life who treats them well, and that's ultimately what it boils down to. And if you can't like take a stand for yourself, it just means that you literally have a place where you feel like you aren't really a valuable person, or that your voice doesn't matter, or that you deserve to have somebody treat you badly, or something like that. And it's a really really common thing that's out there, and almost everybody has that kind of a fear or that kind of a thing inside them, right? Most people have it. The question is, do you allow that to take over and control how you behave? Or are you the kind of person that has those fears and you push them aside and you're like, no, I am valuable. I am worthy. I do deserve to have an amazing person in my life who treats me well, who respects my opinions, who respects my voice, who respects my desires, right? And so that's what I found, at least, is the biggest problem that a lot of these women are having, where they don't feel like their voice is really important, right? Or they let guys walk all over them or whatever, and it's really sad. It sucks. But part of my job is to help women see their own value so that they can take a stand for who they are, so that they can step up. And when a guy comes, and even if they're attracted to him and they end up going, oh no, I want to be with you anyway, they go, you know what? He's not treating me well. And so instead of going where I'm really attracted to somebody and trying to make them see my value and trying to make them see me and treat me well, instead I go to where I'm already being valued, right? And that is usually the key. I had a woman come to me a while back, and she was talking about how she was like, well, I do see my own value, but he still doesn't treat me very well. And I was like, well, you know how I know that you absolutely do not see your own value and don't believe in your own value? Because if you did believe in your own value, you wouldn't go and be with a person that doesn't see your value, right? When you believe in your value, you don't go back to that, right? You don't go to a situation where somebody doesn't see it. You don't go, come on, you need to see you're like shaking them. You're like, you need to see my value, right? You go, okay, this person doesn't see my value, and so I'm not going to go there anymore. I'm going to go where somebody's treating me well. Someone values me. Someone actually, likes me and respects me and treats me well. I'm going to go to that, and usually the reason that they keep going back to this old one is because they're in some kind of like trauma bond, or they have some kind of like mental or emotional model in their mind that this is what relationships look like. Because when they were a child, they watched their parents, and their parents were abusive to each other, and so now their vision of what a relationship looks like is an abusive relationship, and so they go back to that over and over, and it creates, it further kind of fulfills this cycle of feeling like they aren't really worthy of having a great person in their life and treat somebody who treats them well. And so it just turns into this big cycle over and over and over again. So anyway, that's all the time I've got for today. Thank you all for being here with me. I hope you got a lot out of this live stream. I hope you will become expert flirters here in the future. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time, and I will speak with you again soon. Always remember that you are worth it. Have a good day, good night, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and I'll speak with you again soon.